Love was one of the first things I understood, but confidence, that came from somewhere else. The origin of the Rockstar goes all the way back to primary school, Talbot Primary School. It was a tiny country school with about 70 to 90 kids. In a school that small, the principal doesn't just run the school, he teaches. And our principal, Mr. Wes Jolly, he had a game he liked to play. I can't remember what it was called, but you had to stand up in front of everyone, pull a topic out of the hat, and speak about it for 2 minutes. No preparation, no ums, no looking downs. Just stand there and talk. Now think about that for a moment. Most adults are terrified of public speaking. And here we were, at 5 years old, standing in front of our classmates and learning to think on our feet. And something interesting happens when you realize you can stand up in front of people and make something up on the spot. The fear disappears, because if you can improvise something in front of a group of people, then delivering something that you've prepared, that's easy. Looking back now, that was the beginning of the Rockstar. Not the ego, not the stage lights, just a kid learning that he can stand in front of people and not shut down. And I'm incredibly grateful to Wes for that. I want to acknowledge him. He was a great man, a positive role model, and I admired and respected him so much. He gave me a gift, something so many adults struggle their whole life with, the ability to stand up in front of a room and not be afraid. A few years after those games with Wes Jolly, another person appeared that helped shape this part of me, Carol Sandel. I was about 10 years old when I started singing in country music competitions, and Carol became the person who guided me through that world. Where Wes had taught me how to stand up and speak, Carol taught me how to perform, how to stand up on a stage, how to make eye contact with the audience, how to hold the room. Those country music competitions were my first opportunities to stand up on a stage. Small halls and pubs, local crowds. And when you're a kid, standing on a stage in front of all of those people, something interesting happens. You start to realize you can create a reaction. You can make someone smile. You can make someone laugh. You can make them feel something. And that feeling, that connection between you and the audience, that's powerful. And looking back now, Carol wasn't just teaching me how to sing, she was teaching me how to be seen. By the time I'd reached my early teenage years, music had become a big part of my life. I'd spent years standing on small stages, singing country music, and I was still working with Carol, learning about songwriting and poetry. Then something happened that changed the direction of that part completely. On the 17th of December, 1997, my half-sister, Ricky, took me to my first ever rock concert. Silverchair, Civic Hall, Ballarat, the Freak Show tour. I was 14 years old, and I remember standing there just watching Daniel Johns, watching him move around the stage. The way the audience just reacted to everything he did. He was headbanging, screaming. The band was explosive. The music was so intense. I could feel the bass drum in my chest. But there was something else about that moment that made it even more powerful. Daniel Johns was only 17. And there I was, standing there, and I was 14. He wasn't some distant adult rock star. He was basically just a kid. And that made the whole thing feel possible. I still remember standing in that moment and thinking, I want to do that. Because until then, music had been something I'd performed. But this was different. This was energy. This was emotion. This was release. And a few months later, an opportunity arrived that almost felt like destiny. A few months after the Silverchair concert, something happened that pushed that idea a little closer to reality. I was at school one day when my friend James bought in a cassette tape. On it was a recording of him and another friend, Tusker, jamming. They'd been playing Silverchair's Freak, just a rough recording on an old cassette player in the middle of the room. So 90s. And I remember listening to that and thinking, this is fucking awesome. It had the energy, the noise, the aggression, the same kind of intensity I'd felt watching Silverchair live. And immediately, I wanted to be part of it. At that stage, they already had a bass player that they'd started practicing with, but it hadn't really worked out, so they were still looking for someone. And I remember thinking something very confidently in the moment. 4 strings? How hard can it be? Turns out, harder than I thought. So I picked up the bass. And in 1998, at the age of 15, I joined a band, Tantrum. And that was the moment the rock star stepped out and into the world. Once Tantrum started, things began to move quite quickly. At first, it was small gigs, local venues, Battle of the Bands competitions. As we learned to play together as a band and learn how to perform, every time we stepped out onto a stage, the rock star got stronger. Because the stage is a strange place. Something happens when the lights go on and the audience is just standing right there in front of you. The nerves, the excitement, and the energy just rises. And suddenly, you're not even playing music anymore. You're holding a room. Before long, we entered a competition connected to the Rock of Stedford. Bands from all over Victoria were submitting entries. Hundreds of entries. To enter, you had to send a videotape, an old VHS, of your band performing. So we got a little bit of a party together, set up the band in James's lounge room, recorded a little bit of a live gig, and sent off 2 songs. And somehow, we made it through. Out of more than 200 bands, we were selected as one of 7 state finalists, which meant performing live at Vodafone Arena in Melbourne. Around 3,000 people in the crowd. For a band of teenagers, that was insane. But somehow, things got even bigger, because after that night, we were announced as the state runner-up, which meant the next stage of the competition would be happening at Laver Arena. 10,000 people. And suddenly, we were standing on one of the biggest stages in the country, singing songs we'd written about our own lives as a kid from a small country town. That was surreal. And in that moment, it felt like the rock star had arrived. That night at Rod Laver Arena was one of the biggest moments of my life. After the performance, one of the band members had to go back out on stage and be interviewed. And because I was pretty good with this, it was me. I talked about why we love what we do. I talked about some of our favorite bands and why we love making music. By the time the evening finished, it was late, and we still had a 2-hour drive back to Talbot. So Mum and I stopped at a McDonald's before leaving Melbourne. A few hours earlier, I'd been standing on a stage in front of 10,000 people, but now I was sitting in a booth eating Maccas with my mum. That's when a woman walked over to the table. She said, "Hi, my daughters have just watched you perform at Laver Arena. They thought you were amazing. Would it be okay to get a photo with you?" And I said yes. But inside, something strange happened. I felt uncomfortable because the moment she asked that question, something in my mind said, hang on, the person they're talking about isn't sitting here. That person's back there on stage. And suddenly I realized something. If this keeps happening, if more people keep recognizing me, then the gap between those two versions of me, it's only going to get bigger. And in that moment, I didn't feel safe. So I smiled. I took the photo and I thanked them. But inside, something had already started shifting. Because if the world was going to start interacting with the confident performer, then that performer needed his own identity, a version of me that could stand in front of the world without exposing the person underneath. And looking back now, that quiet moment in Macca's was the beginning of the John Trager persona. While the Rockstar was happening, something else was happening too. Actually, 3 things were happening at the same time. While one part of me was standing on stages performing music, other parts of my life were accelerating too. The good boy was doing very well. I was school captain. I was heavily involved in Scouts, eventually earning my Queen Scout Award. I received my Gold Duke of Edinburgh Award and later on was awarded Young Citizen of the Year for my local shire. From the outside, it looked like everything was going right because there was another part of my life that was succeeding too. The jock. I had grown up playing a lot of sport. Athletics when I was younger. Then I played indoor cricket and represented Maryborough, the town, 15 minutes down the road from Talbot. Then I played basketball and represented Maryborough again. And eventually, I found the sport that I'd accelerate and love the most. Lawn bowls. Most teenagers spend their weekends hanging out with people their own age. I spent many of mine playing lawn bowls with old blokes at the club, and I loved it. It was competitive, strategic, and very quickly, I started doing well. I won a B-grade singles championship at Talbot. My pennant team won a number of championships, and I played in the Victorian Under-19 State Pairs Championships 2 years in a row. Looking back now, it was a strange time. The Rockstar was finding its confidence on stage. The good boy was being recognized for responsibility and leadership. And the jock was winning competitions in sport. From the outside, everything looked successful. Everything looked like it was working. But inside, something very different was beginning to happen. Looking back now, that period of my life looked incredible from the outside. I had awards, recognition, opportunities. By the time I was 21, I owned my own home and I was sitting on the board of my local hospital. People in the community saw a young guy that was doing well, someone who had their life together. But inside, my experience was completely different because while all those things were happening on the outside, something inside me was quietly falling apart. I remember thinking something that seemed quite logical at the time, a strategy that I thought would protect me. The idea was simple. If I expected things to go badly, I wouldn't feel disappointed if they did. And if something went well, it was a bonus. In theory, it sounded smart. Think negative. Protect yourself from disappointment. But what I didn't realize was thinking that way was starting to change the way I experienced life. Because when you train your mind to expect things are going to fail, you also train yourself to stop believing things can succeed. And over time, that thinking began to shape everything. My music, my ambitions, my relationships, my sense of self. Looking back now, I understand something important. None of those parts were doing anything wrong. The rock star was doing exactly what it was built to do. The good boy was doing exactly what it had learned to do. And the jock was doing what competitors do. But none of those parts were designed to answer a deeper question. And eventually, the question started getting louder. If success doesn't bring happiness, then what does? That question is what led me to start searching for answers. And that search is what this show is really about.